Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello everyone. Today's lecture is on inclusive development. In the previous sessions, we were handling on development administration and how it paves way for sustainable development. In this session, we are going to talk about the inclusive development. Why did this particular inclusive development emerge? Shall we go ahead to see that? Despite the rapid growth, there was a poverty reduction. Poverty reduction was not proportional to the growth. If there is a growth that is happening in the country, the poverty should also reduce, and all the other bad indicators that did retard the growth of the country should also be reducing. But that was not happening. And economic growth did not cater to the development needs of the people. The needs of the people will have to be fulfilled for a growth to happen. So poverty reduction, economic growth, and there was a blatant ignorance towards inequality and unemployment. So inequality is one of the important aspects to be considered. So is unemployment. So poverty reduction, developmental needs which is not being catered, and then inequality and unemployment. All these factors brought in the concept of inclusive development. This inclusive development is pro-poor. It helps the poor. It is for the poor people, for the vulnerable sections of the society, to bring them out from the clutches of poverty by giving them opportunities, equal opportunities, take care of their health conditions and the human capital. We need to invest in the human capital. All the while we were studying about sustainable development. In the sustainable development, we would have noticed that there were 17 goals, and there each goal has got zero hunger, poverty, and then eradication of poverty, and we had unemployment, how to remove unemployment, provide education to the children, the youth. So right to education was also one of the important goals. So for all these aspects, to achieve the sustainable development, we introduced this new strategy called inclusive development. Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, they have brought in a concept for the inclusive development. They say people will have to contribute too, as well as they have to get the benefits if there is a rapid economic growth. If a rapid economic growth has to happen, people should be benefited, people should also contribute for it. So ultimately the source is the people. It is for the people and to the people. This is actually justified through two dimensions, the macro dimension and the micro dimension. What does this macro dimension state? Why don't we have the micro dimension first and the macro dimension the second? No, it's a macro dimension that has to lead, because where we require an alteration in the structures, that can be handled in the macro dimension. We have the ministries. Under the ministries, we have various departments. If we have to add in or remove a particular department, this all can be done through the structural framework. So alteration of the structure is very important, and that is what we call it under the macro dimension. Micro dimension is where the market has to be competitive. The market has to be competitive to restrict restrict the growth and invite a lot of investments. So it has to be competitive. But only when it is competitive, we have the inflow of income in our country. So micro dimension is concerned about that. So when a micro dimension has to happen, when this dimensional factor has to be indicated, in that case the macro dimension should also work along with it. So the market should be competitive by removing the restrictions. What are the restrictions that can happen to the growth? So that has to be removed, and then more investment scope should be given. So these two dimensions are very, very important for the rapid economic growth. The United Nations Development Program, it says that it brings us three different concepts. The same framework, we can remember it in this way: contribute, share, and participate. So for a development to happen, people will have to contribute in creating the opportunity. The groups are none but the people, the citizens. They form the association. So they have to create the opportunities, number one. And even we can bring in the government agencies who should also create the opportunities. Two, to share the benefits of development. So we have to share the benefits of development. If a developmental progress happens, it has to be shared with the people. And last, participate in decision making. So we need to participate in decision making. So it's only then a development happens. So United Nations Development Program brings in these concepts, that is create, contribute, and then share. So you create the opportunities, contribute for the benefits of the development, and then participate in decision making. So when these three go in hand, that's when a development happens. So let's see what is the difference between the inclusive development and inclusive growth. These two concepts are just differentiated by two words. One is the development and another one is a growth. So let us see what is inclusive growth. The growth that not alone creates new economic opportunities, but also ensures equal access to opportunities created for all the segments of the society. The government should not focus just on one particular target in the society, target groups in the society. They have to provide the benefits, accessibility to all the people in the country. So equal opportunities to be provided, equal access to the opportunities to be provided, and they should also create new opportunities. So inclusive growth, it focuses on the economic aspect. So when there is an inclusive growth, then you can have a per capita income increase, and policy making can also be directed for the social well-being. So when these two aspects prevail, automatically you find a growth. So inclusiveness is where we include all the people in the society and do not focus only on one target group. So that is what is a growth. Inclusive development. What happened earlier was there was a deliberate economic growth that actually neglected the marginalized sections in the society. So when they were neglected, inclusive development called for a direct democracy. The democratic principles had to be enforced to have this development, and the distribution of amenities to all the people was very essential. So when these two forces actually are being ensured to the people, there you find the inclusive development. So the concept is more or less the same, just that inclusive growth focuses on the economic aspect, inclusive development towards the administration and management aspect. So these are the differences between inclusive growth and inclusive development. Performance metric. Any company, let it be a public or a private or even students, you are being assessed through examinations. you are evaluated and you get marks. So those marks, through the marks you are assessed. Sometimes you assess your intelligence level through your projects. So there is a performance indicator for everybody. So we get in schools, they issue a report card. This is for you to know where you exactly stand. So it is the same way we have the performance metrics, which is being provided by the World Economic Forum. In short, we call it as WEF. So WEF, in its report, Inclusive Growth and Development Report 2017, outlined the basic features of inclusive development. They said that if you require an entire spectrum of policy framework, you need an integration of systems. Integration of systems is where you need all the official and unofficial actors to come together to form a policy or to make a policy. And it has to be implemented and it has to be evaluated. Evaluation process is the most difficult process that we face. So we need a good policy framework. For an entire spectrum of a policy framework, an integrated approach is required. So that is one of the performance metrics which has to be carried forward. Second one, importance has to be given to the balance, that is a fiscal transfers, balanced fiscal transfers for socio-economic inclusion. What are fiscal transfers? What exactly happens is, we do not know the source of revenue where we carry out the expenditure. Revenue is from some other source, expenditure is carried out from another source. So there should be a balance. So what happens, one particular area, the revenue decreases while the other it accumulates. So there should be a balance in the fiscal transfers. So balanced fiscal transfer can always go ahead for the social economic inclusion. So social inclusion should comprise of business and political ethics, tax code. Tax code is nothing but the slabs that are being provided. When you have the income tax, certain people, they'll be giving you certain slabs. Though within those slabs, people who are within those slabs will have to pay this much income to the government. And even if it's in the business, they also, entrepreneurs also have a certain tax slab. Professional people will have a tax slab. So each one will be given a particular slab based on which you will have to remit the amount to the government. So that is a kind of a tax code. So social inclusion should comprise of business and political ethics, tax code, productive employment, educational quality and equity. So quality of education is very important, and equity, right to education, Article 14 to 16, it speaks about the right to education. Opportunities to the children will have to be provided irrespective of their caste, creed, ethnicity, etc. So that has to happen. So when that is happening, automatically you will have a productive employment. People start thinking. Literacy brings in a lot of thinking. So that is very much important. And it should be pro-labor, pro-business to boost the social inclusion and economic efficiency. So inclusive development is completely for the poor, the vulnerable sections. So it has to follow. These are the performance metrics which the World Economic Forum has given you. That is, you require a good policy framework. There should be a balanced fiscal transfers. There should be a good tax code, provide employment opportunities and equity and equality to be prevailing everywhere. So when all these factors are being fulfilled, we can say that there is an inclusive development. I repeat again, inclusive development is one of the strategies for attainment of sustainable development goals. Now let us see, we speak about the features of inclusive development. What are the strong points for inclusive development? We have 3 pillars of inclusive development which is being put forth by Asian Development Bank, ADB. So the first pillar is inclusive social development pillar. In inclusive social development pillar, they said they have emphasized more on higher education and health sectors. So higher education and health sectors are very much important, because higher education, through education, you are going to innovate a lot of things. Country requires the next generation to be quite literate. Literacy can be just not about writing, reading. It requires more of information literacy. It requires sound knowledge, skills to attain the objectives of the economic growth. So higher education focus is more important, and simultaneously focus on the health, that is also required, because we have a lot of malnutrition. Impoverished children are there. So malnutrition is one of the factors or one of the problems our country is also facing. So that has to be effaced. So these two are very important. That falls under inclusive social development pillar. That's the first pillar. Second pillar is economic growth pillar. Economic growth pillar focuses on poverty reduction and funding for social needs. Where can we go for funding? We need the social needs to be fulfilled. So where do we get the funding? Funding can be through the international organizations. It can be through the banks, the nationalized banks, the privatized banks. They help you in coming out of the poverty. But at the same time, we need to repay that also for the development. Today, you have the banks providing loans for education. Banks are there to provide you with essential services. You just have to purchase a refrigerator and you can pay it in installments. You buy a television, you can have a television at home and you can repay through equal monthly installments. So you have all these facilities available. But then that is where you fund, the banks fund, but at the same time you need to repay back to the bank, because that will be utilized for the development of our country also. So that the second pillar is economic growth pillar. The third one is policy formulation pillar. Nothing can happen without policy formulation. Appropriate macroeconomic, social protection policies, accountability infused administration, and efficient delivery of public services. These are the four aspects which is very important in policy formulation. So macroeconomic and social protection policies. See, social protection policies is where the government has to take care of the societal needs. We have one example as your food security policy. Food security policy is where you have your public distribution system. The subsidized products are given to every people, irrespective of whatever class they belong to. So that is one thing where the government has to carry out. It has to look on to the welfare measures for the people. So appropriate macroeconomic, that is the funding, lending rates, the loans, etc. So all those has to be taken care, and social protection policies. Accountability infused administration. They are accountable. Accountability, they are accountable to the people wherever the policies are applicable to the people, they are accountable to them. They have to inform them, they have to share the policy with them, get their ideas, get the participation of the citizens also. And then finally, it is an efficient delivery of public services. So there is a delivery of the public services, it has to reach to the people. So these schemes, how it has to reach is what the government has to say. So these are the three pillars of inclusive development: inclusive social development pillar, economic growth pillar, and policy formulation pillar. Features of inclusive governance model. So inclusive development, in the previous slide we saw the pillars which has been given by the Asian Development Bank. In the present slide, we would be looking on to the features of inclusive governance model. So development cannot happen if the governance is not good. Governance has to be good for the development to happen. So, we have certain features: voice, design, delivery and accountability. What is voice? Voice is your citizens' participation. The decision making is from the citizen. The government has to reach out to the people and bring the citizens into the forum for discussion, and that can happen through media. So, voice is where the citizen participation is present. 2. Design. Design is completely about the policy structure. So, policy process has to be taken care of. As I keep repeating, one is policy making, the implementation where policy making the government can ask the people to give their demands and preferences, but ultimately it rests in the hands of the government. Policy implementation is again with the government, where we have the executives who will be implementing it in the society, especially the bureaucrats. And then the policy evaluation. This is the phase. Policy analysis or evaluation is a phase where we require a lot of assessment tools. So, in policy making, if we see, there are certain participatory assessment tools. So, those tools, the research tools have to be applied, like Q methodology. We need to have various other methods, research methods, which has to be implemented here. So, participatory rural analysis, that is another methodology. So, while making the policy or while assessing the policy, these methodologies will have to be applied to undermine what exactly the policies are and whether they have reached the poor. So, that is for design. Delivery is where you have seen how much the people will be benefited, how the public services are being reached to the people, to the society. So, that is the delivery. People have to accept. So, we learnt about what is called as the public acceptance. So, public acceptance is very much important in delivery. And accountability, government is accountable. People are also accountable to the government. It is an interlinked phase where the government and the people together are accountable to each other, because they are our representatives. They are doing things on our behalf. So, they will have to be careful in handling the problems and providing the solutions. So, a lot of accountability rests. So, what is the duty of the citizens here? We will have to have a trust and faith on the government also, and provided we also need to give them our preferences. So, that is your accountability. So, for an inclusive development, apart from the 3 pillars, the governance model should also be very good, or the governance should also be good from the government side. Inclusive Development Index. This is our next concept. Everywhere we have an index. Why do we require an inclusive development index? We had studied about the performance metrics, which helps us to judge what are the parameters which can help us to judge the performance of the inclusive development. So, here we have an index. It is a set of indicators of policy and which enables the environmental conditions in 7 principal domains and 15 subdomains. So, there are 7 principal domains. It is a very elaborate process. So, I will not be handling that because it is a huge one and it is a little mind boggling. So, to make it simple, Inclusive Development Index is 7 principal domains and it is being divided into 15 subdomains. So, these key performance indicators show each country's performance on each individual KPIs. KPIs is nothing but the key performance indicators. So, every nation has got this particular performance indicator. Now, the countries are actually being divided into advanced economies and developing economies. So, what determines that? Growth and development, inclusion, and international equity and sustainability. Growth and development, we just discussed about the inclusive growth and inclusive development, how the per capita income increases, has to increase in the case of inclusive growth, and inclusive development where amenities, essential amenities have to be provided to the people as such. So, that is growth. Inclusion is involving all the marginalized sections of the society as well as the other groups together for them to benefit. And international equity and sustainability. So we need to treat everybody at par. We have to abide by the international rules and regulations also in certain aspects. And then sustainability. So when these factors are fulfilled, automatically we are into the phase of sustainability. Framework of policy and institutional indicators. Now, when an inclusive development has to happen, inclusive development and policy formulation actually go hand in hand. They are together, because without the policy we cannot step forward. So policies are very important for the development, the inclusive development here when we take the next strategy. So what is actually here mentioned? In a policy and institutional indicator, first one would be education and skill development. Today, education is being revamped. We were in a scenario where it was chalk and board method, and the students used to go to the schools, and then they had a different kind of extracurricular activities and plus the studies that they did. So it was a holistic approach, but slowly that transformed to a different structure where students started to get upgrade with the technology. Children came to know about the various platforms that are available for education. So a digital revolution slowly happened. Now we are in the hybrid mode. So earlier we were not in the hybrid mode, but then now today we are in the hybrid mode where online and offline teaching happens. Many of us, we did not know where we have the Google Meet. We did not know about WebEx, Zoom, but today all of us, including the children right from kindergarten, are aware about that. That is where your education stands. So our country sees to that even during a pandemic or even during certain kind of problems or disasters that are happening for the country, they will have certain solutions to provide welfare. So education is one of the most important thing, and the skills. Today vocational skills are being given to the people. Skill development is there. You have the National Skill Development Authority who are actually trusting every institution to bring in the students into that kind of a concept. Stipends are being given for them to get educated. So this is an accessibility. So where we have an equity as well as an equality which is being provided to all the students. So quality education is also prevalent. So that is one institutional, or I can say a policy and institutional indicator which can promote inclusive development. Second one, basic services and infrastructure. What are the basic services? Basic services can be, you can take it as the essential services. The transport services, the services help you to move from one place to another, help you to mobilize. So that is a basic services. And digital infrastructure. Every schools today have smart boards. Almost every schools. There are, of course, there are certain schools which do not have smart boards, but then through CSR this can also be brought in. So digital infrastructure is one of the basic service and infrastructure, and that has to be to inclusive development also. Third one is corruption and concentration of rents. So corruption, it is prevalent in our country. What can we do to remove corruption? Can corruption be completely erased? No, it is not possible. But then we can see that, we can see to that we follow the ethics. Everywhere we have a conduct, an ethic. So that has to be applied, that has to be followed for removing corruption. And then concentration of rents. This concentration of rents is accumulation of certain amount of income in one particular area. So that should not happen where you require an equitable distribution. So these things are to be kept in mind if we require an inclusive development. Financial intervention of real economy investment. So, financial system inclusion, intermediation of business investment. So, investments happen through businesses. So, businesses have to be improved. We need to, the country has to support the private companies, private firms, because they are also a backbone of development. They are also a backbone for growth. So, they also have to be taken care of. Then asset building and entrepreneurship. There is a link between education, skills and entrepreneurship. We have a lot of schemes that are being brought by the government. That is, I told you, the startup firms, they give a seed money and for the startup companies, and then there is a sustainable development transformation to bring in the people into employment. So, there are certain other schemes like that where they transform the governance to e-governance to transform into a proper governance also. So, schemes are available for applying these principles. So, asset building and entrepreneurship is very important, where we have to help the small business ownership companies, home and financial asset ownership. So, we need to help them to come out of come to the forefront to enable the growth. Then employment and labor compensation, economic participation and opportunity, wage and non-wage compensation. So, employment and labor compensation is very important. Without manpower, though we have machines, but still without labor, it is not going to be possible. Labor, manpower is very important, and they have to be taken care of by the country. Otherwise, our country will face a lot of brain drain and people will start moving from our country. So, that has to be focused. So, compensations or any kind of labor issues should be handled with care. Fiscal transfers, as I told you, we have the tax code, the social protection. So, we have to remit a certain percentage of income to the government for them to develop their infrastructures. These infrastructures are going to return back to us. It is for the people that the government is carrying forward. So, these are the institutional indicators, or we can say, as I told you, for a broader spectrum of policy, these indicators are required to be kept in mind for us to get into inclusive development. But yet, we face a lot of challenges. What are the challenges? We studied about Nehruvian model, we studied about Gandhian model, we studied about Manmohanomic model. So, all these models were existing, but then they had a problem. Their results were actually not favorable. So, they worked towards inclusive development through their vision, policies and institutional framework, but results were not favorable. So, there were certain challenges that had to be met out. So, first one is employment was neglected. These models spoke about social system. These models spoke about how to uplift the people, but then how the employment has to be provided. Certain models spoke about how the economic reforms have to be taken place. The economic reforms are required, but then it is only when employment opportunities are given to the people can we think about the growth or the development of the nation. So, first point was employment was neglected. Second problem was human resources were not utilized optimally. Human resources, we need to utilize them to the entirety, because they have to be taken care of. They have a lot of skills, they have a lot of knowledge also, and that has to be utilized appropriately for the growth as well as for the development. Third is illiteracy. We do not think about illiteracy. We think, yes, right to education is there, but how far are the children getting educated? That is where our policy also must prevail. Right to Education Act is prevalent, but then how many students, how many children are benefited? So, there we require a policy evaluation. How many of them know about the schemes in our country? How many of them are actually aware about the schemes? Many of them are not aware because they are illiterates. They do not have the education, right education. So, they can fall into a trap of into anything when they do not know how the schemes work. So that's when they get into trouble. So illiteracy is one of the problems which has to be dealt with immediately. 4. There is a wide gap between development of economic infrastructure and social services. Infrastructure is very much there. Social services, yes, but there is a gap prevalent. Infrastructure and the services that has to reach to the people. We have transport facilities, but then what happens in the remote areas? Are the people benefited by those? They are not benefited. Some will have to walk long distance to fetch a pot of water also. It is still prevalent. So, economic infrastructure and social services, the gap between these two has to be reduced. So, that is one, but that was not dealt with in these models. Then shortage of foreign exchange. We speak about involving bringing in the foreign exchange, but how do we have? How do we, what is the method, what is the way to bring in the foreign exchange? The new economic policy spoke about liberalization and globalization, but how can we bring in the foreign exchange? So, that is when we had the boom in the car industry, the vehicle, the transport industry. At one point of time, we could see many cars. Today, we find in India so many cars are plying on the roads, right from BMW. We have a lot of cars which are plying on the roads. Today, we have even Tesla, the battery car, which is also prevalent. So, India is actually coming into forefront there. But these models did not think about how we should have the foreign exchange. The foreign exchange is very much important. So, we need to invite people from international, from outside to carry forward with their business. So, we need to provide them all the facilities also. Sixth point is benefits of agrarian reforms did not percolate down to the marginalized sectors. Agrarian reforms prevailed, but then it did not reach to the agricultural sectors. Farmers did not know what are the benefits, what are the subsidies that was available to them. So, agrarian reforms did not percolate. Percolate is something where the essence of it has to be reached. It is like how we prepare a coffee decoction. There is a percolation system. So, so there is a percolation system. So, how the benefits of agrarian reforms did not percolate down to the marginalized sectors. It has to reach them. So, that was not fulfilled. Next, defense consumed a major portion of the budget after attaining independence. Yes, that is a very natural aspect, because after independence, India has to be taken care of very well, because we have come out of the imperial control. So, naturally these models would have thought about taking care of the country. So, defense was given more importance, budget was more allocated for the defense forces. So, that was very much important. Even today, we do have to allocate a certain amount of budget for the defense, because of in order to protect ourselves from infiltration. Then, large gap existed between the organized and the unorganized sector. So, we speak about employment opportunities, we speak about skills. So, organized sectors where we have a good, let us take the textile industries or the car industry, the motor industry, whatever. But then you come down to the cottage industries. How can we link these two? Is this possible? Or unorganized sector, we have many people who are into the skills, like we have electricians, we have plumbers, and they all belong to the unorganized sector, but then their skills will have to also to be utilized. We can't be segregating them away from a different sector. So, these two have to be brought in. We should see to that where their employment can also be fitted. Means of production were in the hands of the capitalist instead of the state owning them in a social economy. So, what happened is, the means of production, the secret of production is the process that fell into the hands of the capitalists. So, ultimately the state did not have any kind of a role to play. The state should have taken the process the rules should be given to them and asked them to make. But then ultimately we are not, if that is being done, then we are not living in a democratic country. Our system will completely change into an authoritative nation. So we will not be able to do that. But yet this model says they have not fulfilled that, but that is something which we cannot fulfill because of the pattern or the system of the government that is prevalent. And public sector could not compete with the private sector in innovative production. Yes, that is, we had the liberalization, globalization. So when these two concepts came in, private sectors felt the boom in the society. So public enterprises had to go a step back for them to work. So they could support the private sectors through rules, regulations, and etc. And then we had the exponential growth of population. So yesterday in the sustainable development, I mean in the previous session, in the sustainable development we were talking about the exponential growth of population and how to avoid them by reaching out to the people on the basis of the essence of family planning systems and how the child mortality has to be reduced. So all these aspects have to be brought in. Those were the strategies. So owing to the exponential growth of population, that problem was not addressed in the model. Probably this has to be thought in the long run. They did not think that India will be a progressive economy, but then it would be a developing economy. So we are in the phase of progression. So we need to think much ahead. And private sectors have taken over basic services like health, education, increasing the gap between the rich and the poor. So today you have private education prevalent everywhere. So health sectors, you have hospitals, huge hospitals with very high infrastructure, but then that has to be provided in the government hospitals also. Certain aspects have to be brought in the government hospitals because people will have to reach out to the government hospital. Government is for the welfare. So there are people from the marginalized section, they cannot afford to the higher the private hospitals. They will approach only to the government hospitals. So it is the duty of the government to provide infrastructure for these people, to see to that their health index also is extremely good. So that is one of the things. So these models will have not fulfilled these, but certain aspects we cannot fulfill, but major aspects can be fulfilled if we have to attain a inclusive development. We have the political challenges. So historical challenges, political challenges. After the independence, it was a mammoth task. I could say it is a huge task for the countries to reconstruct back the nation. For a reconstruction of a nation, immediately after independence, it was a very tedious task, but then still we had certain challenges like protectionist measures. We need to take the protectionist measures, protection in terms of the country as such, protection in terms of economy, protection in terms of social, cultural. So all these measures will have to be taken through protectionist aspect. 2, democracy. Democracy has to be protected actually. Democracy has to be taken very good care because the government should always think about how it has to reach the people. The sources from the people and the benefits are also for the people. So these challenges are prevalent. Democracy, now people misunderstand democracy also. They take certain power in their hands which should not be there. The democracy concept is where decision making should be given to the authority, but then this duty of the citizens is just to participate, but then we have to see according whether we adhere to the principles, we adhere to the constitutional principles, the laws of the country, because constitution today it is based on the living intent. We have framed a lot of constitutional principles, but in reality what happens, the constitution principles are abided according to that aspect. Then collective identity politics. Collective identity politics, it is essential to find out a group, the collective responsibility. who have the same kind of an ideology. So, an identification is required, but then we do not have. That is one of the political challenge. Redistribution. Redistribution can be of income, redistribution of wealth. So, we speak about equitable distribution of wealth, but are we into redistribution of income and wealth? So, that is one of the challenge. And again, it is a duty of the government, the executives, to see to that the wealth is being redistributed, and it is a duty of the departments, the ministries, to check on to all these aspects. Social equality and environmental protection and social welfare policy. So, these two are again the political challenges which I have been explaining often now, where we need to provide equal opportunities for all, and we need to protect the environment and provide welfare policies. We had the models which were against these challenges. We had the historical challenge, we discussed about the political challenges, but then these models always were against those challenges. Against in the sense, they also had certain aspects to help the government, to help in the inclusive growth. So, one is the decentralization, as Gandhian model states. Decentralization, make one self-reliance, that is self-reliance and trusteeship. So, self-reliance and trusteeship, today we have the Atmanirbhar, where people are trained to be self-reliant. Social freedom, mass employment, Swadeshi, produce the goods in your very own country, holistic development and human values. Human values is one thing which is actually diminishing. People are not following the ethics, the code of ethics is diminishing, the conduct is diminishing. People do not understand the values of the human values basically. So, that has to be inculcated to the people. So, Gandhian model is one such where we need to follow decentralization. Authority has to be delegated. Nehruvian model spoke about completely about the constitutional principles itself, where he says about parliamentary democracy. The parliament also should get the democracy. When a bill is passed, the ministers, the private members should always be given the opportunity to speak. The opposition party, the ruling party, when they discuss on one particular bill, equal opportunity should be given to the other opposition parties also to voice out their opinion. So, when the two parties join together to take up decisions, then of course, you will have a good growth and development. So, parliamentary democracy is very, very important. Secularism. Secularism, we should not consider any kind of a religion. We have many religions in our country, but we should not demarcate them. We should not segregate them, look into people, look at the people based on the human values. We should not think of a people belonging to another religion. All the people in our country are one. So, secularism is very important. Economic planning for a welfare state. So, we need to plan for the welfare state. A proper economic planning is very much required, and non-alignment, where we need to follow the principles where we should not use weapons to fight against, but we have to remain silent and attack the enemies. So, that is one of the non-alignment, where we need not align with the principles of other nations. We have our individuality. So, that is the Nehruvian development model. Views of Montek Singh Ahluwalia. He was one of the chairman, he was one of the person who headed the planning commission. So, he said he has brought in about the inclusive development. He says we need to have regional inequality, there is a regional inequality, urban rural issue is prevalent, jobless growth, basic services, socio-economic growth. So, he has given us very different points to understand what actually hinders the inclusive development. He says there is a regional inequality prevalent. Regional inequality within one particular region itself, there is a lot of caste clashes. If caste clashes are happening, there will not be any development. So, when that should not happen, that is where education should be given to those people. Literacy has to be provided, give them with more opportunities, employment. So, people will not have time to think about the caste or creed or what gender you belong to. Rather, they would always think about how to develop that particular region. So, regional inequalities are prevalent. 2. Urban-rural issue. There is a lot of problems that we are facing because of the environment. No proper rainfall, then very scorching heat summers. So, these can affect the agricultural situations. The agricultural lands are being there are many barren lands also. So, they are also affected. What happens is the farmers, they do not have proper, they cannot carry forward with the agriculture. So, they start moving to the urban areas. So, there is a lot of mobility from the rural to the urban in search of employment. So, when they do not get an employment, they start borrowing money. So, that is where the issue actually begins. So, when they start borrowing money, they are unable to repay. So, you find a lot of suicidal by the farmers. So, these are certain issues which has to be handled with the help of human values, where we have to create the self-reliance. We need to bring in the trusteeship. We here, I mean the government has to do it. So, there is a lot of urban rural issues that are prevalent. Jobless growth. Jobless growth means there is no growth in employment. So, that was what was stated. By today, we have a certain amount of growth because the youth have become the entrepreneurs. They have the innovation. They have the principles of innovation, principles of creativity are present in them. So, a slow movement of employment opportunities. You find many people are not, the jobless is where it mostly happens when there is no enough skill or education being provided to one sector. So, that should not happen. We need to remove that phase also. So, differently able people, the speed, unemployment. So, various other factors are also being given by Montek Singh Ahluwalia on inclusive development. So, this was when the Planning Commission was set up, but today we have the Niti Aayog, which actually transforms India. So, it is a think tank. Niti Aayog is a think tank. So, where all the ministers from the state with the Prime Minister heading the entire session, he would be addressing to all the chief ministers of the states and the chairperson of the Niti Aayog. So, they would discuss about the problems and then they would provide solutions also. What is the problem being faced in every state? So, that is required. So, Niti Aayog has been brought in, which is a think tank. So, what are the issues? We have been studying about inclusive development, but again we face certain issues. Issues in the field of agriculture, that is price coverage, PDS, overall development. So, PDS is already been discussed. It is about the public distribution system. So, the Food Corporation of India has to take good decisions. Earlier we had, that is again a technological advancement where we had the books for the ration cards which are being given to the people, and every time they go and purchase, a tick has been done or they write in what are the purchase that has been done by one particular group. So, that was the situation, but then today you have smart cards, you have the ration smart cards. So, once the smart cards are being there, you have to swipe it or the code is being scanned, and then whatever you have purchased, you get it through your SMS. So, that is one of the upgradation of technology. So, but agriculture, we have these issues where we do not have proper storage of grains. The Food Corporation of India faces this problem where there is no proper storage of commodities. Everything has been put under one particular shed. So, that storage facility has to be provided, and plus the system has to work from the higher and to the lower level. So, that has to work. The communication barrier should be cut off, and things have to be communicated. Delegation of authority has to happen. So, these are certain issues that we find here. Second is poverty and inequality, which we have already discussed, the regional disparities, the right to food, public distribution system, management skills. We need require the management skills. Public management is where efficiency remains, where economy is there, where effective participation of the citizens are there. So, public management skills are very important. Then urban poor, politics in India and corruption. So, these are the issues that can thwart or that can hinder the inclusive development. So, what are the resolutions? Demographic liability, improving the quality of public service, rapid inclusive development is required, good agricultural development, disparities between the states should be resolved, right to information should come forth, social development, environment, science and technology, accountability of reforms. So, these are the major, you can have these solutions, these are the resolutions for such kind of issues to be faced. So, when we spoke about this particular resolution, social development or environment in science and technology, today is presently we find a lot of interdisciplinary approach coming in, where science and humanities join together for the welfare of the people. So, technology is also required, research is also required, development is also required, theoretical framework is also required. So, there is a lot of interdisciplinary approaches that are being brought in for social development, and accountability is also one of the major aspects. The accountability or transparency by the government to the people is also required. So, these resolutions can actually provide a solution for the issues faced. Finally, to conclude, India is definitely improving on most of the indicators of inclusive development, but at a slackened pace. The slackened pace is because we have various challenges, as we discussed, the political challenges, the historical challenges. So, the first important challenges that India has to face is reduction of poverty, inequality should be attended to, and employment opportunities should be provided, and then take care of the basic facilities of the people. So, all these factors have to be taken care of by the government. So, the country will go at a slackened pace if this does not happen. So, in that case, the marginalized sections will also have to be brought in for an inclusive development. Governance needs to be tightened with dedicated personnel, ethical training and capacity building. So, governance is also necessary. People will have to be trained. You need to have dedicated, ethically sound people, personnel, and then capacity building. It is where you need to bring out the awareness, let it be in the local or the various or the other areas. So, capacity building has to be developed. So, once the nation begins a journey on the path of inclusive development, there will be more political, social and economic stability and eventually the peace. So, as I keep repeating, inclusive development, inclusive growth, these two aspects are always required. These are the strategies where our system is changing, when there we find a transition of the system from development administration to sustainable development. If we have to fulfill the goals of sustainable development, we need to focus on inclusive growth and development also. Thank you.